The reading is Luke chapter 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering round to hear him, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law murmured, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. "Suppose one of you had 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbours together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Does she not light a lamp, sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbours together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin.' In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to the servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But you have to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again, and lost is found.'" Amen.
Please be seated. We're going to pray together. Lord, help us to hear you, commune with us in our hearts. Help us to know, Lord, your presence with us, and give us a sense of discernment as we listen to you speak to us. Help us, Lord, to lay aside our own presuppositions and be opened to the Spirit speaking to us in the depths. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. The reading actually for this Sunday on the lectionary is from the prodigal son. But as I was reading this, I just felt I needed to home in on the reason that Jesus told the 3 parables. And that's why it was such a long reading for Sylvia. I wanted you to hear the beginning and the three stories and how they're all connected. And in Luke chapter 15, verse 1, the scene is described, and Jesus is surrounded by people who are considered unworthy by the religious leaders and actually by themselves and by the culture that surrounded them. Tax collectors and sinners. And it seems to me that, and you know this yourself, that when you feel judged or you feel, you're not worthy or you're not accepted, you don't go to the people that make you feel like that. We've a survival instinct that would take us away from people who would make us feel a sense of unworthiness. And sad to say, sometimes the church over the years has adopted a position where they seem to decide that people are worthy and unworthy when it's not up to the church. And I hope this message today will help us to see the message of Jesus and maybe how we sometimes end up just being like the culture around us. But these people would have been gathered around Jesus. But they were attracted to Jesus. It says about Jesus that the common people heard him gladly. That people who felt condemned by everybody else just seemed to be drawn to Jesus because he didn't have a condemnatory bone in his body. And you wanted to be near him. And you were attracted to him. And when you feel unworthy, you notice judgment and even just a twinkle in someone's eye, or twinkle's the wrong word. But you know what I mean? You can just see that the judgment just there in the eye. And you're sensitive to it. And so these people wanted to be near Jesus because they were accepted by him. But in verse 2, it just says something telling. It says, "But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered." Now, this word just seemed to jump out at me. And as I was researching this word, muttered, in the Greek, its roots are in a humming bees. Right? And if you think about it, the whole idea is here that they were grumbling and muttering around as the people were there. So they're running around going, that sort of, right, just yapping and complaining. And the thing about the Pharisees are not straightforward people, because they just like to chitter among themselves. And it's something that we all still know in institutions, and the church is not exempt from it either. Most people don't do things straightforward. People like to do things chittering among themselves. And so the Pharisees are doing the exact same here. These people are coming to Jesus, people who feel drawn to him, accepted by him, and the Pharisees are running around like buzzy bees, just chittering among them. And then this is what they're muttering. They must have been able to pick up what they were saying in the middle of their zzz. "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. This is a big issue for the people of the day. It still is a big issue, but it was a massive issue for the people within Judaism. At that time, and during the time of Jesus, just to give you a wee bit of an understanding of, say, the background to this, why it was such a big issue, that there were groups who wanted to keep the law very precisely. And there was a group called the Essenes, who were based where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found at a place called Qumran, which you can still visit today. And the Essenes were a group who withdrew from society completely. They withdrew from the ordinary people and from the towns because they didn't keep the law as precisely as they would have liked them to, and they didn't want to become contaminated by them, right? And become unworthy like them. So they withdrew, and they became like a monastic community and totally exclusive. And so this group was happening as Jesus is also doing his ministry. The Pharisees were like the Essenes, but they were a wee bit more friendlier, if you like. They remained in the towns with the people. And the Pharisees observed all the purity laws, they did all the hand washing, they did all the attendance at the synagogue, they did all the stuff that you normally do, but they kept themselves separate. The word Pharisee actually means a separatist. They didn't eat with ordinary people because then they would have made them impure. And so here you have Rabbi Jesus welcoming and eating with sinners and tax collectors. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's a disgrace. How could this Jesus, this rabbi, eat with these sinners? It is so counterculture that it is a shake to the very society of the people of the day. It's an absolute disgrace. But why is it a disgrace? Why did they get caught up like this? Because they were sincere people, the Pharisees. They weren't the bad eggs of life. They would have helped people out. They tried their best. But they were the people who believed that they had to be separate from everybody else, and they didn't like Jesus doing it. Now, we have a tendency to think that Jesus just spent his time with tax collectors and sinners. Right? He didn't. If you have a look at Luke 14, the previous chapter. Luke 14, chapter 1. Right? We can read here and we can see that Jesus wasn't just someone who ran to the ordinary people. It says, on one Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee. So Jesus, in Luke chapter 11, there's also a record of Jesus going and eating with a Pharisee. So here we see Jesus going up the Malone Road. He's eating with a prominent Pharisee. Somebody with a wee bit of money here. And so I'm sure some of the other people were saying, look at him going and eating with the snobs now. But we don't think about that of Jesus. Right? And the reason that the Pharisees are offended is because they identify Jesus as one of their own. They recognize that Jesus is a teacher. They recognize something in Jesus. They wouldn't have been bothered if it had been tax collector Joe Bloggs who was eating with Mary the prostitute. They wouldn't have given monkeys about that, the Pharisees, because they wouldn't have had anything to do with them. The fact was that Jesus was seen as one of them. He had eaten with them. And here was this Jesus now just running around, just sharing food with everybody. How dare he? A sinner in the New Testament and the sinner in Judaism was someone who didn't keep the purification laws. I want you to get the idea of sinner right here before you start throwing on 2,000 years of church history onto the word. From these people, a sinner was someone who was not following the purification rules. They were people who were outside. They didn't carry out the law properly. It was an expensive time to be a sinner if you were there, because you had to pay various money at the temple to get your sacrifices all made. And if you couldn't afford, do you eat or do you go down and make yourself right by going through the temple system, throwing a denarius in, getting your animal sacrificed and all the rest of it? So, the money might get in the way of you actually not being a sinner anymore. It's hard for us to recognize this, but this was the way the system was. That's why Jesus was so radical. He put an end to the whole temple system by offering forgiveness in the house. You didn't have to go to Jerusalem to get your forgiveness sorted out. Everything about Jesus turns the system upside down. And what we find is here that Jesus has eaten with the Pharisees. They are not happy now that he's eaten with these other unworthies who don't follow the purification rituals. And actually some of the professions are unclean. Shepherds are unclean. And so the Pharisees follow the code very, very strictly and become more and more exclusive. Okay, right. You just have to get this bit of background here, because the story means nothing if you don't see how radical it is that Jesus is doing. Jesus is challenging their worldview. He's challenging their interpretation of the law, the scriptures. He's challenging everything that they believe in and hold dear for thousands or hundreds of years especially. He's challenging the core of who they are as a people. But Jesus, and this is the beauty of Christ, if we can see how Jesus was so radical, he refuses to interpret the law in an exclusive way. For Jesus, if the law gets in the way of compassion, Jesus disregards the law. He puts the law to the side. Remember when his disciples were walking through and they were eating the corn, or when he healed the man on the Sabbath, and Jesus turned around and said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. When it comes to compassion, Jesus overrides the law. And we fail to see that. We put everything, religion's easily manifest or managed if it's nice in and out thinking, black and white thinking. And that's the way the Pharisees thought. By eating with tax collectors and sinners, he is undermining the social order of the day. And what it meant was, it meant acceptance. When you share bread in the Middle East with someone at their table, it means you're accepting them. It means you're having friendship with them, that you're bringing them into intimacy. You're no longer an outsider, you're one of them. And we know that throughout history, I suppose, in our own society as well, that we prefer to eat with people of our own group and our own class. We feel more comfortable with people who are like us. And we would prefer to eat with people, of our own ilk, if you like. And if you want to look at good proof of this, I want you to see it in Galatians chapter 2. This is now one of the main followers of Jesus, Peter. Right? Peter is now, Jesus is risen from the dead. Peter's away being an apostle. He's sharing the good news all through the Gentile communities. When Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, this is Paul speaking, because he was clearly in the wrong. Before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, that's from the ones from Jerusalem, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The circumcision group were a bunch of Christians who were Jews who believed that all Gentiles had to keep the law. And here we have the Apostle Peter, who would have been with Jesus on this day. Here he is, and he still feels, I better not be seen eating with these Gentiles, or I'll be judged. So the culture is so strong that even Peter, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, he's still struggling with the idea of eating with those who are outside his group or his race or his ethnicity, or whatever way you want to look at it. Jesus' message is so radical that we cannot hear it. Even Peter couldn't hear it years and years later, that Paul had to oppose him. And so when you hear me speaking here this morning, this cuts to the core of what we believe about Jesus and about God. People do want to be different. They want to decide who is worthy and who is unworthy. And will come up with different rules, just like the Pharisees did as they interpreted the scriptures, to decide who is worthy and who is unworthy. But Jesus says that his table is always open. Jesus is saying, I will eat with anybody. But he goes further than that. And he tells them these 3 stories. That's the context of these 3 stories. Now, I'm not going to go through all the 3 stories. I'm picking out just the main point that covers them all, the main themes that run through the 3 stories. The 3 stories build on the Old Testament. The 3 stories, as I've said to you before in this church, I said last week, when you hear the words ground control, right, we have all these songs in our head, in our history and in our culture, that we instantly know what someone's relating to. And so when Jesus tells these stories, he's relating them to Old Testament history. So in a sense, when they hear there's a shepherd, their mind is instantly drawn to Psalm 23, where they read, the Lord is my shepherd. That's what they would think. That would be the instant thing they would think of. And so Jesus is showing that image, and he's taken it a wee bit further. Then he goes and he talks about the good woman who looks around the house and finds the coin. And that would be related to Psalm 131, where you lie at rest, where Israel lies at rest in its mother's arms, is a picture of God. On Mother's Day, strong picture of the feminine. Then we have the good father and the prodigal son. And you can read about that in Psalm 68 and Psalm 103. What I'm trying to let you see is that these stories had deep resonance within the culture. And Jesus identifies himself with each finder, and he points to a picture of God. as the one in the story. In each of the three stories, something is lost. Right? There is 1 in 100 sheep, 1 in 10 coins, and 1 in 2 sons. So there's a sort of a decrease in progression is the wrong word. What do you call that? Regression, if you like, in numbers. It starts with 100, then 10, and then 1 and 2. And then the scenes move. As a good storyteller does, they're telling one parable, but there's 3 stories. And the parable moves from the wilderness to the house where the woman is looking for the coin, to the inner circle of the family. In each story, there is a price that is to be paid. The shepherd has to leave the 99 and go out into the wilderness to find the lost sheep, and then carry the heavy sheep back to the flock. Also, too, the woman has to search diligently, it says. And in the father's case, he runs out, he gives up all dignity. He humiliates himself in front of the whole village by running out to meet his son who has come home. Something is lost, something is found, and then there is rejoicing in the story. There is a celebration and there's lots of eating. Now you begin to pick up the theme. It's the setting of these meals that is significant. It's the meals that link the 3 stories. They all end with a party, with food and a welcome to everybody to enjoy and celebrate together. The shepherd invites his friends and neighbours in because he's found the sheep. The woman invites her friends and neighbours in because she has found the coin. And the father has a party, and the music is reaching to the very fields because the older brother comes in and he can't, he's a bit miffed. What Jesus is saying to the Pharisees is this: you may accuse me of welcoming and eating with sinners, and you're absolutely right. This is what I do. This is why I've come. I have come to welcome all those that you consider unworthy, those who don't keep the rules. Remember the definition of sinner. Don't move back into your 21st century view. Jesus is saying, I welcome those who are outcasts in their society. But I not only want to sit with them, and I not only want to eat with them, I will rush down the road, I will shower them with kisses, I will drag them into my presence, and I will eat with them and love them and embrace them. And so what Jesus is actually saying to the Pharisees, it's a lot worse than you think. I'm not just going to eat with them. I'm going to run out and meet them. And I'm going to hug them and kiss them and embrace them. And this is the God that we worship. This is the Jesus Christ who shows us the heart of the Father. Christine was telling me, and the homeless team were out last summer. They were out giving out some food and drink to some of the homeless people in the city. And Christine was saying there was these 3 young people. Now, when young people, I think, mean under maybe 20s. All right. And they bought pizzas. And apparently what happened was they went over to this homeless fella, but they didn't just give him a pizza. They sat down and they ate the pizzas together. And that picture has stuck with me in my head. You know, it just moves me that there's these young people running around Belfast that just think, I'm just going to buy a pizza and sit down and eat it with this guy. And so often you hear the bad news, you fail to see that there's such a good heart around as well. But the picture is such a picture of Jesus. He just seems to go beyond the help, that he actually wants to eat, that he actually wants to have fellowship and to embrace and to accept. He doesn't just give alms. He goes beyond it and gives himself. And there's something in that is such a challenge to my heart, but it is such a beautiful picture of who God is. A God who looks, who chases after the lost, who never gives up, who just keeps looking and who diligently searches. Jesus is this one who eats with everyone. Jesus eats with all people. Jesus is not against Pharisees. He eats with Pharisees. He eats with Pharisees who are uptight. He eats with people who feel they are superior to others. He eats with prostitutes. He eats with tax collectors. He eats with sinners, because Jesus is not exclusive. His welcome does not depend on whether you are worthy or unworthy. Religion is about trying to become something, to become worthy, and to meet with God. Religion often becomes like this. Don't drink, don't eat, don't go to the pictures. Well, this is Ballymena in the 1960s. Don't work, don't do that job, don't do this. Try to change yourself. That's the way it's often presented. But religion gets in the way with an encounter with Jesus, because the Pharisees had him in front of their eyes, and the religion got in the way. They couldn't see, and they couldn't get the encounter. And the gospel is that you will change when you have an encounter with this Jesus. When you have an encounter, when you see him for who he truly is, not just what preachers have been saying, but when you see him for who he truly is, you see someone who then welcomes you, and the good news is, follows the encounter. When you have the encounter with love, your mind changes. The law breaks your back. You're always trying to be better. God won't love me because I had a drink last night. How dare you bring the cross down to the level of a Budweiser because you've brought your cultural rules in with you? Your cultural rules are the problem. And they were the problem for the Pharisees, but they were sincere people. My heart goes out to the Pharisee because they're more in line with me, growing up in Northern Ireland. And I have to have empathy for them because I can understand their heart. But the good news is Jesus rides right through all that stuff, and that's why he's so controversial. And he says, no, Gentiles are in. Prostitutes, the outcasts, the Pharisees, the Buddhists, all are welcome here. And there's not a bigger Methodist message. The Methodist Church is based on this message, that it is a universal gospel, that it is a gospel for all people. Today I want you to say to you all in this church, and you've heard me say it more times than enough, you are welcome to this table. You are welcome to this table. Whether you're a Pharisee, whether you're an older brother, whether you're a younger brother who has gone wild, you're welcome to this table, whether you're a stupid, helpless sheep. You're welcome to this table, whether you're an inanimate coin. All are welcome to this table, because this table represents the table fellowship that Jesus practiced. Why would it suddenly change? This Jesus, who in his Last Supper sat with one who betrayed him and one who denied him, and still had supper with them. All are welcome. And when it says in those verses that there's more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents, remember what I said about repentance means. It means a change of mind. You change your mind because Jesus came to change your mind and my mind about God. He didn't come to change God's mind about you and me, because he already loved us before the foundations of the world. He came to change our mind about God. When you repent, you are changing your mind about God. And God, who is revealed in Jesus, is a God of welcomes. He is a God who accepts you just as you are. We sing at the beginning, Come just as you are to worship. He accepts you just as you are. All we do is accept his acceptance. I don't know about you. It doesn't cost me a lot. Thank you for that acceptance. Now I'm loved. Now I might be able to live this life that you put before me. I can only live the life if I know I'm loved. If I don't, I get bitter and angry and scared, because perfect love casts out fear. When you know you are accepted by him, you can join the party. The 3 stories end with a celebration. Revelation ends with a banquet. The hope of all of Israel is a party. Parties have loads of food and loads of drink and loads of joy. This is the God we adore, the God of welcomes, the God who says, come, come to me, come to me, come to me. You're accepted, you're loved. And he thinks highly of us. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, this is such good news that it just seems difficult to hear. Lord, our culture, just like the Pharisees' culture, tells us, no, these people are unworthy. Jesus shouldn't be eating with them. But Lord, we want to change our mind. We want to change our mind and see the God that is revealed in Jesus Christ. A God who embraces the Son. A God who hugs and kisses us into his presence. And so, Lord, I pray that each person in here this morning will experience the embrace of the Father. That they will know that they are loved just for who they are. They will know the acceptance of God. Thanks be to God for the good news that is in Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.